Welcome back, everyone, to the Writer's Parachute. We're guiding author and writer dreams to a perfect landing. Today, we have with us a very special guest. It's Jason DeHart, and he is an author, writer, podcaster, and teacher with a PhD in literacy. And we're going to be talking to him about his book. It's a new book. It's not even out yet. It'll be out in April. It's up on pre-order now. It's Building Critical Literacy and Empathy with Graphic Novels. So we'll talk to him in just a moment. But of course, we want you to go ahead and smash that like button. Go ahead and hit the bell and the subscribe button so that you can enjoy every episode here on the Writer's Parachute. If you'd like to follow us, we are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, and now on Threads and TikTok at Writer Parachute. That's Writer Parachute without an S. Also, if you would like to get a weekly reminder in your email inbox about new episodes, you can go sign up for a newsletter at sendfox.com/the writer's parachute and get that to you every week. Okay. And then, of course, every week we start off with a topic of the week. So this week we're going to talk about storytelling. This is leading into our season 3, where we're going to really dive deep into the aspects of story. So let's talk about storytelling. What is storytelling? Storytelling is primarily started off as part of communication. It was how we travel news from one person to another. It was how we communicated with each other, to drawings on the cave walls, to grunts and points, and whatever it is. It's all storytelling. We're repeating information in some way or form in a manner to get people to pay attention. So it is about communication. It's also about engagement. It's about making that connection with someone else, whether it is direct, as in the old days where you're having a conversation with somebody. It's also about books, when you're reading a book and making that connection with the reader about an idea or a thought. It's also about exploring ideas. It's about bringing new ideas in front of an audience that may not see it before. It's about giving them information and presenting it in a way that makes them curious, makes them ask questions, and sparks discussion. So the next time you're thinking about a story, whether you're writing one or reading one or just talking about it, think about what makes a story great and how great we all are at storytelling. So that's it for this week. So, of course, there's always so much more we could talk about storytelling and our topics of the week. If you would like more information, you can always reach out to us at info@thewritersparachute.com, and we'd be happy to get back to you. All right. Of course, we want to get to our guest and get on with our show. This week, we have with us the amazing Jason DeHart. I read his book. I've read all of his books, which are very in-depth. It was like a rabbit hole of learning for me to go down. He is a writer, podcaster, teacher with a PhD in literacy. We're going to talk about his new book, Building Critical Literacy and Empathy with Graphic Novels. Such an interesting idea. It is available for pre-order right now on Amazon. It will be available and released on April the 2nd of 2024. Jason is a podcaster who shares literacy on his podcast, Words, Images, and Worlds. He's also an English teacher, a former literacy professor, and has edited several and co-edited books released that focus on comics, media, and literacy, and has published a book that stems from his dissertation, plus an upcoming book about teaching with comics from NCTE. And I'll let you go ahead and tell us what those initials stand for, because I would mess it up. How are you today, Jason?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be on this side of the podcasting desk.
It's always different, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Sometimes it's like, I think, okay, I've done this so many times, it's so easy. But then when I'm interviewed, I'm like, but I want to ask a question. I don't want to answer questions. I want to ask the questions. And so it's a little different, but that's okay. We get through it. I'm so excited to have you on here. Don't get a whole lot of other podcasters on here, or ones that are so closely related to what I do in a very different and unique way, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, the literacy family of podcasters. I love it.
That's it. Well, there's not a lot of us that actually talk about books or talk about authors or talk about the process or the impact they have. We have a
Hmm.
lot of
Hmm.
them that are like, "Oh, here, let me read this book," or, "Oh, here's a whole bunch of authors you should go read," sort of thing, or
Hmm.
maybe in depth on a specific book, but not one that just kind of covers the spectrum, which is why I find it so fascinating. It's like I could read books and drink coffee and talk about writing, you forever. So
I brought some coffee as well. Absolutely. It's decaf. It's in this nice invisible cup. So absolutely.
well, it's it is one of my joys to drink coffee, to read books, and talk about books and writing. So, what more can you do than put it all together in a podcast and enjoy it? So, and I get to talk to amazing authors and writers and talk to them about all their ideas that they have and why they write their books, which I find almost as fascinating as the books themselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, So we're going to talk a little bit about your new book, which is Building Critical Literacy and Empathy with Graphic Novels, which I
Hmm.
am just blown away that you put all of that together in one book. It is available, as I said, for pre-order and is set to release on April 2nd. So can you kind of give us an idea of how this particular project came together with all these kind of seemingly separate ideas? And what was the inspiration behind the inception of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned NCTE, and that's the National Council of Teachers of English. And so the backstory of the book is that during the pandemic, I was a literacy professor doing online classes, sort of doing what people do to keep afloat and engaged in that time. And I had put in a proposal for a poster presentation at the NCTE conference about comics and literacy. And so I got this email from an editor, and they said, would you like to write a book about this? We would be really interested in featuring something about comics. And so, of course, I said yes. And I never thought that I would have an editor approach me. This was a very different sort of process. And long story short, in between, that editor actually left in CTE. And so I reached back out and kind of followed up and said, I received this email. I'm still very interested in this, and wound up connecting with another editor, which is Kurt Austin. And Kurt worked with me in the development of the book and the development of working through the stages of getting it all to be where it is now. And as far as the topic itself, critical literacy and empathy, those are some really major threads of some of the work that I've done and been engaged in the past 4 or 5 years or so, and really probably even reaching back before that. And so thinking about a series of topics that a book about graphic novels and comics could touch on was kind of an interesting challenge because there have been a lot, and I've written other articles and posts about ways you can use graphic novels and comics, but to think about critical literacy, some of those deeper questions that I like to ask and explore with my students, as well as empathy, which I just feel is an important cornerstone of what it means to be a human being, of what it means to be a decent human being. Those are some of the connection points that came through there. And comics are an ideal way to think about seeing our experiences and seeing experiences of people that maybe are not like us or that have a different set of experiences.
Right. And I just, as I said, it was like there was so much information in this book. It was like I was sitting here for like a couple of days trying to figure out what do I touch on? What because it was
Well,
like
I'm glad to hear that.
each thing was kind of like going down a different avenue and learning so much more about it. And I just love this. So I want to know what you would think is the first step to kind of understanding the value of graphic novels and comics and literacy, because you take a different view of that compared to what we would say typical children's books or young adult books and that kind of ilk in teaching children and getting them to come to literacy and kind of stay with reading for the most
Hmm.
part.
I think part of that is taking the time to go through a book, taking the time to kind of explore what's out there, because it's just amazing to me. I've been reading comics since I was about 7 years old, and really thought of them as, superhero books. Batman was a big character in my life growing up, and to see the range of things that are being published right now, many of which I try to mention in the book, and uh, many of which I also try to feature on the podcast. There's a wide range of materials that are out there. And so I think kind of the first step would be taking inventory of what exactly is out there. And maybe if a listener has an idea of what a comic is, there's probably a book out there that's going to change that, challenge that, extend that. And then I love the conversation that can happen around books. It's Frank Serafini that says when you read a good book, you don't want to make sort of like a model out of it. You don't want to make a mobile. As English teachers, very often I've been guilty of doing things like that and having students do things like that. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to tell somebody about it. And so taking the time to notice what's on the page and those marks that the artist made that go along with the story, the comics have a lot to offer in that regard.
Right. And, it takes you back to, the bottom line. All it takes to write a good book, whether it be fiction, nonfiction, comic, graphic novel, manga, anime, whatever it is tell a good story.
Hmm. Hmm.
You
That's
know,
what we're
and
looking for. Yeah.
so just for my audience sake, so what is the difference? Because you would be the person I would ask this. What is the difference between a graphic novel, a comic book, manga, or anime versus regular, what we think of as children's books and or young adult books?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a young adult book usually looks a lot like a prose heavy type of approach. I happen to have one of the first young adult books ever right here,
Oh.
The Catcher in the Rye, and it is very much a prose oriented sort of a thing. Didn't even think about that, but there it is, versus a picture book, which is kind of like very spare prose. The picture book authors that I talk with, and you probably know this from your own experience in authoring, it's poetic. It's choosing those words and then pairing them up with images, and usually they're kind of separated. You have like words here, images over here or up here, above or next to the words, somewhere else in location. And then you have comics, which are this sort of like word and picture salad where you've thrown the words together, you've thrown the images together, and usually they're in little narrative boxes. Sometimes they're not. They have their own sort of grammar. And Will Eisner, who is a notable comics creator from decades ago, coined the term graphic novel as kind of a marketing idea of saying this is not just a comic, whatever just a comic means, but it's this longer form. Hey, it's a novel. It just happens to be graphic. It happens to be visual. And so usually when people say graphic novel, they just mean a longer form comic, either a standalone story or a collected edition. A lot of modern comics that release in like 22 page to 48 page issues each month are eventually collected by publishers into a trade paperback, which you could then technically call a graphic novel, even though it's the assembly of those stories. And then manga and anime are their own worlds, really a different set of design features that come in,
Mhm.
a different sort of orientation in reading from end to beginning, and of course they're popularized around the world. And so manga being the printed form, and I believe anime is sort of the filmic version that's often created. And they definitely, I have students that are very much into manga, and it's really interesting to see too how comics that are more mainstream in the United States, manga being more mainstream in a lot of other places, are really influenced by manga at the
Mhm.
same time.
Right. Which is why I wanted to ask you this question because a lot of people use these terms interchangeably, and they
Hmm.
sort of are of all of the same salad, as you said, but
Yeah.
they're also very uniquely different. And I love your explanation. So, what is the difference in bringing that information across to the reader in, let's say, this graphic novel comic
Hmm.
section of the literary world versus the prose heavy, the word heavy, the illustration heavy books that we normally associate with reading to kids?
Yeah, yeah. So if something is being read aloud, if something is more prose oriented or prose heavy, the words are doing the work in a lot of ways there and carrying the story.
Mhm,
And in many ways, the visual, it's an invisible process. It's almost, I think of it as like telegraphing from one mind to another. So I, as the author, I'll explain something and I'll draw it out in words in an effort to get the reader to sort of follow what I'm saying and create their own image. And that's one of the interesting things about reading too, is that when we're reading, we sort of, if we're reading well and we're reading accurately, we're probably creating an image in our mind. So it's really good practice just to think like, what am I seeing right now as I'm reading this? And so it's that invisible conversation of author to audience. And it's a mixture. Louise Rosenblatt is this reading theorist who said that it's a transaction. So the interaction that an author has with me will be a
mhm,
little bit different from the interaction that an author has with you. You have your experiences, you have your perceptions that you bring to it. Maybe you cast a slightly different visual based on things that you've seen and experienced than what I might cast
mhm,
from a prose heavy page versus a graphic novel, which is the image also being created by an author or an artist or a person that's doing both roles. And so they've written it, they've imagined it, but then they offer it to the reader, and the reader has the opportunity to sort of see things that someone else has seen in the way that they chose to render it. And then they have the words to unpack and explore critically, as well as the pictures. And it's been interesting to talk to authors that don't illustrate their own work because very often they'll say, well, I write something and then I send it out and I get it back and I open it and I'm just amazed because
mhm.
someone has seen what was inside of my mind and they drew it onto the page, or they saw something completely different, but it changed it and it made it even better.
Right, which is amazing. So I'm gonna split your answer in half and have a
Okay.
response here. Uh, so I think first I'm going to talk about, with graphic novels and comics, I think it's as much about what is not being said,
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
is in the background or like the little hidden elements and Easter eggs, so to speak,
Hmm.
that, that tell as much of the story as, that we don't get in traditional books because you aren't seeing things in the illustrations that don't go with the story, but you do get that a lot with graphic novels and comic books. And it's like it kind of adds an almost like mystery element or thriller element to the reading of the story because you have to work a little bit harder to kind of really get what's going on.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's like and some of it's like red herring, so again, there's reasoning and you do talk about that in your book, which I just found just completely fascinating. And then the second thing I wanted to say is like, when I read a book, it's like I tell people this all the time. After about the first paragraph or so, I don't see the words anymore. I am
Hmm.
literally seeing a movie going through my head.
Hmm.
I just don't see the words, and it's like and I'm always surprised when somebody interrupts me, and I'm like, "Oh, I really did, I read a bunch of pages, but it doesn't all I'm seeing is whatever's going on in my head." So, and I do love that. That's why I love reading so much because 'cause I'm so easily entertained by my own imagination, my own mind, so
It's
so
a gift. That's a gift.
it is well, I've been reading for a very long time, and I read a lot of books. I probably read about 60 or 70 books a month.
Oh, nice, nice.
So,
Yeah.
but that's one of my joys in life. So why short myself? It's not fattening and it's not illegal. So
True,
you
true.
get to enjoy it. All right. So in your book, you discuss graphic novels and comics as ladders to literacy, which I love that phrase.
Mhm.
For our audience, can you explain what you mean by that? And I also want to know how we can use the ladders to literacy to encourage readers and people to continue reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would first say that Ladders to Literacy wasn't something that I came up with. It was in a book called From Striving to Thriving. Um, but I take that concept and think about it through the lens of the types of books that I might use with students, or even reflecting on my own reader history, which I do quite a lot, just in thinking about what works in teaching and what's worked for me. Having something that really connects you as a reader and connecting with a story, a character, some aspect of the work that speaks to you, but then not stopping there and not saying, "Well, that was a great book. Okay, let's move on and do other things and engage in other things." But what's the next book? And what's the next book after that? And as somebody that used to teach and still occasionally teaches college classes for students that want to be teachers, sometimes I'll get the question of like, well, what if I have a student and they only want to read comics? Is that okay? And I'm going like, yeah, that's reading. It's reading. And if you really want to sort of expand and move to something else, then maybe the next more complex comic is the way to think about that. Or for me, again, it was popular characters. So I connected with comics, which then connected me with films about the characters, which connected me to novelizations of the films, comics adaptations of the films, books about the characters. I mean, I remember reading really pretty historically exploratory Indiana Jones novels as a younger person because I love the character. And I might not have understood everything that was happening, but I was willing to go with it because I loved that character. And it was easy to cast that in my head to create the mental picture because I had Harrison Ford right there and it worked. So that's sort of the idea of what I mean when I talk about ladders to literacy. Now, you've read this, what's next? What's next after that? And it just makes me think of all of the students that I try to connect with books that say, well, the last book I read was sixth grade. And
Mhm.
this is someone who's almost about to graduate high school. Or offering choice readings to students in some of my literacy courses at the college level. Well, this is the first book I've read for fun since junior high or
Mhm.
sometime in high school. So that continuing practice, it means a lot. And I think that that's part of building empathy too, exploring stories from people around us and people that can sort of challenge our notions and assumptions.
Right. Which I absolutely love that. And I just want to understand uh from your book, you were talking about particularly the letters and about it encouraging readers in reading. And I get that you're making a connection, and I find it fascinating that only kind of this graphic novels and comics
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
romance books are the only ones that are able to kind of like create this whole world around their books. I mean, you
Yeah.
have Comic-Con, you have people dressing up in the costumes, you have people doing the trading cards and trading the comic books, and particular stores that just focus on comics and stuff like that. You sort of have that a bit in the romance realm, where people
Hmm.
are very much into those, get-togethers for romance authors and all their trading cards and that sort of thing. But it's fascinating, and I think this is what draws in readers, and especially young readers, because it also builds like a community for them.
Hmm. Hmm.
What
Yeah.
what do you what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, or is this something, am I just going off on crazy rabbit trails here?
No, no, that's very, very accurate. And Fandom is a very interesting thing, and especially with online connections that people can make now, there are fandom communities where you can try out your own stories with the characters that you love. And then there's this interesting phenomenon of cosplay, which I've seen people do with things like Harry Potter. I've seen it as more of like a small corner of the literary universe, but
Mhm,
there does seem to be something about comics that invites people to embody those characters
mhm,
and explore them, collect the t-shirts, collect the action figures, all the things. So there's kind of an immersion in it.
mhm.
Romance novels, it's funny that you mentioned that because people do check out stacks of them from libraries and immerse themselves in it. I don't know that people cosplay as romance characters, but that might be a
Not
thing.
as much. I mean, you have
Yeah,
a
I've not
few
done
of
that.
them, but not quite as in depth.
I've not done that. But now I'm thinking about the student in my class this semester that was reading a romance novel. And it
Mm.
was the funniest thing because she said, "This is not really my thing, but I started it. And so I'm kind of finishing it just, and it was more of like on a dare. But, but yeah, there's this definite culture around comics and visual stories that way that works in a really interesting, unique way. And then there's a collection side to it too
Mhm.
that's part of fandom.
Right. Well, I honestly think that, it's like with anything in life, it's like, you dip your toe into the pool and it's like, and you
Hmm.
find the water's warm and then there's people in there splashing and having fun and you want to join them and then they all come back on a certain day, so you want to come back on that certain day. And I feel like that's sort of the way that graphic novels and come across, especially
Hmm.
in young readers, is it's very inviting to, to be part of that community. You don't feel like you're kind of on the outside looking in, or you're just the kid reading this unusual book.
Well,
So
and I'll tap back to your opening
mhm,
comments about storytelling because storytelling is all about connection, connecting with the past or connecting with experiences in some way. And
mhm,
so, absolutely, if I can have affiliation and belong to this group, if I already love this character and other people love it too, then that absolutely creates a sense of belonging. And have you ever had that thing happen where you're talking about books and no one knows what you're talking about but that one person at the table? Because that's one of the ways that my wife and I connected. I would make references to novels and she would sort of like explain what I was talking about, and it was, sort of the eyes meeting across the table like, "Ah, you've read Jane Austen. Okay, I have too." So there's definitely that connection through literature.
mhm. Yes, yes, yes. I have that often where I'm like, yeah, I read this book the other day, and people just eyes glaze.
Yeah, yeah.
So, all right. So, I want to know what you think are the biggest misconceptions about graphic novels and comics, and what is the biggest obstacles in using them to advance literacy, especially in the formal teaching arena.
Yeah, so I think one of the assumptions is if you've seen one, you've seen them all, which
Right.
is sort of the assumption that's made about a lot of literature.
Sure.
If I've seen Garfield, I've seen comics, or if I've seen Batman, I've seen comics. And as I mentioned earlier, there's so many to explore. There are lists online. Book Riot has lists of wonderful graphic novels to explore. So that's one of the misconceptions. I would say that another misconception is that they're really easy and they can be supportive reading experiences if you're a reader that really taps into that visual, but they can also be really challenging if you're a reader who sort of travels through and goes by the words only and then reaches the end and says, "What was that about?" Because there were images there too that
Mhm.
had to be taken in. Or you mentioned sort of the noticing the smaller parts of images. So kind of checking out what's happening between the panels because they're static images and pulling into that a little bit. Those are a couple of the misconceptions. And then as far as obstacles to overcome, uh, I think that there's almost a fear that circulates of certain books of like, oh, if I have a character who challenges my thinking in some way, then I can't read that book, or nobody else should read that book. And that's just good critical thinking, to be able to believe what you believe, think about the world, and then sometimes make adjustments as you need to based on new information. I mean, that's how empathy and critical literacy are built. So I had a professor who's actually a college president and a person of faith one time that said, there's no idea in the world that's going to steal your faith. There's no idea that's going to rob you of that. So I think giving folks the space to tell stories and to tell their own stories in their own way
Mhm.
is one of those things that needs to happen in a free democracy.
Well, and I think particularly in schools, I used to be a reading specialist, and what I
Mhm.
found was this idea of they're not really books.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, no, my kid wants to read those, but those are not really books. You need to get him to read a book. And I'm like, what do you mean those are not really books? I mean,
Yeah.
they're between pages, they have words in them.
Yeah. And I still fight those assumptions sometimes in that language. It creeps through, and that's one of the things that I try to mention in the book as well, is that it's really about breaking down those assumptions and hierarchies. Uh, just because you've read Ulysses by James Joyce, and I have, doesn't mean that you got necessarily any more or less out of it than you might have from a comic. In fact, I've probably read comics with more insight than James Joyce Ulysses, just to be honest.
Well, yeah, there
Just
was just yeah, it was kind of like it was like, okay, so let me get the dictionary, a
hmm
thesaurus, an encyclopedia, and some language books while I'm reading.
And then we learn he's lonely, and
Yeah.
okay.
I know, and it's just like, wow, this is a really long way to say that he was just
Yes.
bored.
Yes.
All right. So I want to know what you think are the critical steps to help us expand options and build excitement for reading with readers.
Yeah, read widely. Read widely. My goodness. And you mentioned some of the challenges on the teaching side as well. So assuming that you can just sort of hand something over and
Mhm,
go, here you go. There's always readers need readers. Young readers need readers to guide them through.
mhm,
I had a friend, Katie Rowe, who recently posted that even older readers need read alouds, and that's absolutely true. So a critical step, I think, is just building awareness of what's being published and then modeling that appreciation. And also being okay if someone doesn't like the thing that you like, because that's part of the journey of finding what does connect. That's part of the artistry of teaching and the artistry of sharing books. Not every student that I encounter, not every friend that I have really likes comics, and that's okay. I personally am not very tapped into the romance novel market. It's not my thing.
mhm,
It's just not me.
right.
I've read a few. I read some Nicholas Sparks. I live in North Carolina. Absolutely read Knights in Rodanthe, but I was good after that. All respect to the tragedies that happen in small places in North Carolina. But yeah, it's about finding what connects with you and the stories that resonate with you most.
Right. Well, and it's like I have my favorites. It's like I don't read horror mostly because we talked about my
The
imagination, and
imagination. Uh-huh.
it's like I read those books, and then that monster lives in my closet forever. So,
Yeah. It has to be the right
there's
time
a
of day.
reason for that. I read fantasy and sci-fi. It's probably not my first pick, but it is there, and I enjoy it from time to time. But you're right. But I experienced that when I was working on my first book for my middle grade series, as I went and talked to a lot of parents, teachers, educators, and got one side of what they thought, how this should be presented. And then I sat down with a bunch of kids, and boy, did
Hmm.
that open my eyes. I found that a lot of them don't like reading the longer stories in elementary school because there's no pictures. They don't have
Uh-huh.
anything to kind of help them make sure they're understanding the story. It's
Yeah.
like, we get picture books up till, like, age 7, and then we just kind of like, "Oh, here's a bunch of words now." It's like we train them to have pictures and words, and then all of a sudden we take the pictures away, and they get confused, and it also causes reading level issues, because they're like, "Oh, well, don't read that," and so they kind of stumble and start with that.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I'm like, "Well, that's simple enough, add some illustrations in there." It's like, "That's not hard." It's like, why are we not doing this more? It's like, let's help these readers out. Let's get them reading more. Also, too, with the pacing, it's like one of the things they said is like they'll read like halfway through a book and then they get bored. So it's like
Yeah.
pick up the pace. It's like they'll figure it out. They'll either go with you or they won't, but pick up the
Hmm.
pace and get through the story. Have some exciting stuff going on. Also, they're like, oh, I read by chapters. I don't read by words. I read by chapters. So it's like I put a bunch of chapters in there, made them super short so they feel like they're advancing through the book really fast. And I always left it with a cliffhanger so they absolutely wanted to turn that page. I had one teacher tell me, she's like, you wrote this book in a very wicked way. She goes, I started reading it to my class and they kept going, one more chapter, one more. She goes, we spent the entire day and read the entire book.
Nice. That kudos to you. That is a powerful author move. The cliffhanger connecting to the next chapter. I love it.
Well, that's it. It's like, these are all I'll get it out in a minute. Tricks, tips, and tools for writers,
Hmm.
especially
Hmm.
when you're dealing with young readers, because everybody's attention span is really short, but theirs is like a nanosecond. So if you drop the ball for that nanosecond, they're gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've got screens and videos and stuff that's flashing lights. It's like if you're going to give them a static thing, you better make it exciting and it better be moving fast.
Absolutely. And you were talking about pictures and how there's that certain age
Mhm,
where you don't get the pictures anymore. I'm a person who appreciates the art of words, how words can be arranged to
mhm,
create an image, but then I also appreciate the image and the style that comes through in somebody's line work or composition on a page. So
mhm.
there's just a lot there to appreciate and unpack.
Well, and sometimes it's easier to bring across the image. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a reason they say a picture is worth 1,000 words because you can say so much more with an image that would take you pages and pages and pages to say in words.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think they kind of end up reinforcing each other as the readers mature. And it kind of
Hmm.
helps them, because like I said, I don't put one on every single page like they do in picture books. I just put one for each chapter, but it kind of helps them reinforce what
Hmm.
they read. And they're like, oh, okay, I didn't get that, but I see the picture now, I get it.
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of thing. So um I just find that fascinating, and that's kind of what they're doing with comics and graphic novels, is they're
Absolutely.
giving them those images with the story, and I think that's why they're very popular as well.
Hmm.
All right, so we're gonna shift gears a little bit, and we're gonna talk about your writing. So I wanna
Sure.
know what obstacles or challenges that you've had to deal with or experience while you were creating this book for publication.
Oh, I think imposter syndrome is always a thing when you're writing and creating. That moment where you kind of feel like, is this getting across? And then there's just the mechanics of writing a book, of putting everything in place, getting it in the right place, working through the process, organizing the ideas. I mean, the reading part was really a joy to dig into the graphic novels that are part of the book and to get to highlight those, but then figuring out where things fit and how things flow together. And in a book, there's that question of, have I said this already?
Mhm.
What is the right place? And I also write academically. And
Mhm.
so there's that sort of middle ground of writing in a way that is accessible and is useful versus sometimes when I write for academic settings and academic situations where it's almost like, okay, bring all your terms and make sure you define them with more complex terms. So there's sort of that negotiation process too, but definitely the imposter syndrome kicks in at a certain point. And
Mhm.
were it not for the joy of writing, were it not.
Mhm. Well, yeah, we talk about imposter syndrome a lot here. It's like people laugh at me. I've actually named my internal critic George. He gets sent to the closet a lot because he
Hmm.
annoys
Hmm.
me. And I find that that works for me. It's like when I'm feeling that internal critic or that imposter syndrome, it's like, all right, George, you gotta go.
Yeah, yeah.
You
I
know,
think is this the part where I was mentioning throwing drafts away and things like that, or does that come later?
we're going to talk about that a little bit, but I mean, you can
All
mention
right.
that now too. We're going to use
It's
it
a
in the tip of the
foreshadowing.
week at the end of the show.
That's right. It's a foreshadowing. So that is something that I've struggled with, and I do have tips on that.
Okay.
Stay tuned. Stay
All
tuned.
right. Awesome. Well, that's always exciting. So,
Cliffhanger. See,
there you go.
I'm borrowing your
Cliffhangers.
method.
There you go. So, you've also written a bunch of other books. We have a teaching challenged and challenging topics in diverse and inclusive literature as
Uh-huh.
one, the reading teacher as another, the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy as another, and then an English journal, and then many, many more. There was a list of a bunch. Most of them are focusing on education. They are academically written, but they're great reads nonetheless. So I would
Well, thank you.
encourage anybody that's curious about how to get your child to read, why they read, or why they're, they will go towards certain books or styles or books, or why they may be struggling with reading. I would say go pick up a couple of these books by Jason and check it out. So I want to know what you think parents and other informal educators can gain from your books. I know what I think, but what do you think?
Yeah, well, I hope I can, in the midst of sharing theories, I hope I also share practical ideas. I'm a big proponent of sharing the practical, and if you can't use it practically, then let's retest that theory. So I hope that's something that people get. I hope that people think about the reading that they're doing, that young people in their lives are doing, either students or children that they have, or whoever it happens to be in their life. And I hope that they see some of the strengths that kids offer and that kids bring, some of the interests that they have, because my thinking is that kids do a lot of reading all the time in different ways,
Mhm.
and there's a lot there to build on. There's a lot of work to do in reading, certainly, and in reading instruction, but there's also a lot to build on, and so many tools that we now have to support that as well. So I hope I point to some of those things, and I share bits and pieces of my story as well in a lot of my work. So I hope that some of that comes through. I'm a first generation college student, first generation PhD. Um, Wanted to be a writer, grew up in a small town in West Virginia, never really expected that to be possible. I dreamed. But you never know where things are headed in your story and in your journey. And so I would say don't limit yourself. Don't let other people limit you. And if there is somebody who's limiting you, find a supportive voice that can guide you in the right direction. Certainly, we always want to be open to support and constructive criticism, but the key to constructive criticism is we have to be able to construct something out of it that's positive. So, those are a few things that I would say that I hope people get from the work.
Well, I think they'll more than get those things, but I also think, it's important if you take nothing else away from this conversation, but just stopping and thinking why you gravitate towards certain styles of writing,
Hmm. Hmm.
why you enjoy those and how that speaks as much about us as it does about the writers themselves or the particular genre. And maybe step back and think about why is that and what is the connective tissue to possibly other genres or other styles of writing. Because as you said, even if you have a child that's in, elementary school that's looking at graphic novels or comic books, and they're not getting it from the regular picture books, then go ahead and let them read that. Or if you have a struggling reader that's trying to write the comic books and it's not getting it, vice versa, I think, picture books could help. Some
Hmm.
of the longer stories. I mean, very famously, the Harry Potter series, is middle grade,
Hmm.
although I think it's mislabeled. I think it needs to go at a much higher reading level. Some of
Yeah.
them, are
As they
a
go,
little bit
yeah.
challenging. I would say it's an excelled middle grade reading, but there's a bit of fantasy. There's a bit of mystery and stuff and elements and all that. And I think it goes across all genres. I mean, even nonfiction books
Hmm.
such as yours have an element of story. They have an element of mystery. They have an element of character in them. That's
Hmm.
just the way we tell stories. And I think maybe if we step back for a moment and look at why we read certain books over and over again, or certain style of books over and over again, we might see where we can expand that and look at maybe some other genres, other style of books. Me, I
Hmm.
try not to discriminate. Again, nothing against horror novels. I have a closet full of monsters. I don't need any more.
I understand. Stephen King, I tried to read. Have you ever seen his book Later? Or no, it's Joyland is the one.
Mm, mm.
I started reading Joyland one night right before bed because that is a ritual for me. I read before bed most nights. Um, pretty much every night. And I thought, oh, it's more on the mystery side. It's more of a crime novel.
Mhm.
He still scared me. He still scared me. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this story. So yeah, I respect that. I respect the possible books to stay away from or read at different times of day. I can definitely respect that.
I think what Stephen King is so good at is he makes the average person scary,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
average situation scary.
Yeah.
It's not something out of the ordinary. And it's like that's the part that you're just like
And he
looking over
uses
your shoulder.
he does this thing where he uses song lyrics a lot. If
Mhm.
you'll see, like, if there's a character driving or something like that, the song lyrics will be there. So it's like you connect with it and go, "Oh, I've heard that song before." And he's got you in the senses right there because you're hearing the song, you're in the moment. It's a very clever thing that he does.
Yes, yes, yes. He's very clever. All right. Well, we got to keep moving along here. So I know you got a lot to talk about in this next question. What is next for you?
Oh goodness. More podcasting. I've really enjoyed doing the podcast project, the Words, Images, and Worlds project. And as you mentioned, it's just great to talk to authors and creators. Have the occasional scholar, professor that comes on and talks with me. And so I'm excited to keep doing those and share about authors that are willing to talk to me. It's always a very nice thing. I am currently working on an autoethnography research piece that looks at poetry and comics, but also the experience of being first gen college student and professor. I am also working on an edited collection that looks at stories across media. So both of those things are in development. And then I have a few other writing pitches and writing proposals out, edited book collection wise, and perhaps a volume focused on comics that I would love to work on. So I've been working on those. I have a couple of book chapters that are in development. Some of those are collaborations, so I'm excited to see that. One about depictions of mental health in children's literature that I'm really excited about, that I'm collaborating with a scholar in the United Kingdom on, and more reading. Absolutely. More reading all the time, always reading and more teaching. I have a fresh group of students that are on the way next week, and then I get to find out what connects with them. So very excited about that as well.
Well, that's always so exciting. I always look forward to the first day of school and getting need new teachers, new students, because it's you get to start over again, brand
Yes.
new with them, and it's like it's always a different story, it's always a different approach, and I just love that. I do kind of miss that. So here on the writer's parachute, and mostly for season 2, we've been focusing on reviews. Reviews are
Hmm.
absolutely king when it comes to books and writers and authors of all walks of life. Reviews are not complicated. They're mostly simple. They're an opinion from you as the reader as to what you think of the book, what you like, what you didn't like, who you recommend it to, what you think is an opinion. We always have one. It could be as simple as I liked it, or it could be more complicated and in depth. So we're going to ask Jason to write a
Hmm.
review for his book, Building Critical Literacy and Empathy with Graphic Novels.
All right. Shall I write it in the chat or shall I just
How
spit
about
it
you
out?
just tell us?
All right. All right. I really appreciated the way that going through this book helped me think about different kinds of stories. Uh, so many titles to explore, and there are so many more. By the time I finish reading it, I know that there are more that are published. I'm really excited to try out the ideas or keep trying out the ideas. I was so pleased to see words from authors and creators in the chapters talking about their stories and their books that they've created. And I also really appreciated the time that it took to make sure that each chapter connected to an idea and that there was a teaching tolerance or learning for justice standard attached to help me understand what was going to be in that chapter. How's that?
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. Five
Great, great.
stars. We're going to give you a good review on that. And the reason that we're doing that is we're putting our guests on the spot to write a review about their own book, which is really difficult because it's something they've spent so much time and energy. It's like, how do you tell the world that your child is beautiful? They just are.
Right, right, right.
So, but the reason we do that is to illustrate to you how easy it is to write a review. It's just an opinion. It's what you think about the book. So the next time you read a good book, make sure you go and leave a review. If you recall where you purchased the book from, where you borrowed it from, you can generally go back there and leave a review. Amazon takes reviews. They love reviews. If you purchase the book there, they will make sure that you are a verified reviewer and your review will go up at a higher ranking. If you cannot remember where you purchased the book from, you can always go to goodreads.com and find the book or the author and leave a review there. Even if the
Hmm.
book is not on Goodreads, you can go ahead and leave a review and it'll be added to Goodreads. There are many other places out there that will accept reviews, but that's generally the one that most people look at. So next time you read a book, make sure you leave a review and don't forget to reach out to the author. This is one of the few ways that we get feedback from our readers, and so they would be more than happy to hear from you, no matter whether it's good, bad, or otherwise. So make sure you do that. So
Uh, have
I
you heard of
know
NetGalley? Do you know NetGalley? I'm sorry. I was
NetGalley,
just,
yes.
yes,
NetGalley is
okay.
generally to get books to read before they're published, but they do
Hmm.
offer those, but that's a little bit different. Anyone can go to Goodreads, but NetGalley is
Yes,
more to get books that you're going to read
bloggers.
and review. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about your books, and so where can listeners find your books? I know most of them are up on Amazon. Are they are on
Mhm.
any other platform at this point?
Amazon is sort of the main page unless you go to NCTE's website for the graphic novels book. Routledge, IGI, those are websites where you can go and check out books directly from the publisher, whatever is most convenient for folks. And then I do share about podcast episodes and things like that in a Facebook group, as well as on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. So there are those spaces as well where people can connect. And I'm a little awkward about sharing about my own books, but I do that from time to time as well.
Right. Well, yeah, it's so many other books to talk about. I don't talk about mine all that much, but we are glad that you're available. And of course, don't run out and grab a pen and paper. We will go ahead and put links to all of that in the show notes for you. You also have a podcast, as you mentioned, Words,
Mhm.
Images, and Worlds, where you talk to educators, authors, and creators. So, where can they find the podcast? And if they would like to be a guest, if they're an author or creator out there, where would they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to have guests on, always featuring people. There's a Facebook group, as I mentioned, Words, Images, and Worlds. You can find it there on Facebook. And then I also have a more of a private Facebook page, so you could link out there. And then Spotify is where the major page is for the audio version of the podcast. It is also on Apple. It is also on Amazon, so you can check it out there. And then when guests want me to, I share videos as well. I always make that available for guests if they're in a space where they've sort of combed their hair or they're comfortable with it. And so there is a YouTube space as well for the episodes where I don't care that much about what I look like most of the time, but we try not to worry about that too much.
Yeah, no, they're there to talk about books and worlds and images anyway. So we
Exactly.
appreciate that. And we will have links to that for you in the show notes. And don't forget, a lot of times people will forget we're over on Amazon, and Amazon does carry a lot of the podcast
They do.
through their audiobook platform.
Hmm.
So we will have that for you. And where would they reach out to you if they want to be a guest?
Yes, yes, thank you so much. You can just send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. That's probably the best way to do it. It'll pretty well be something that I see immediately, and then I will probably respond to you if I'm not teaching pretty quickly to set up a time and figure out days and things like that. So, more than happy to include folks and talk about books and explore ideas that way.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and put that information in the show notes for everybody. We did talk about your social media accounts. So, do you have any upcoming events that you'd like to share with the audience or listeners?
Sure, I am doing a talk for UGA. I believe Dr. David Lowe from Fresno is also speaking at this event. And so that will be the day after Valentine's Day, February 15th online. And then I also did a talk for the Voyager reading group about this time last year, and I am developing another talk with them that should be in sometime in April. So watch for both of those things, and you can hear me go full on talking about reading instruction and sharing stories about the classroom.
Okay, great. And we will get the information and connections to all of that stuff and have it also in the show notes. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? Any kind of newsletters or anything like that you would like to share with the audience members?
I should really do a newsletter, but no, I don't do a newsletter. But I appreciate the chance to talk with you and once more to be on this side of the podcasting desk. It's interesting, surreal experience to get to talk about one's own book, and so I appreciate that. And if you could just travel back to 7-year-old me and say, you know, those comics you're reading, someday you're going to be talking about them. Um, I might believe you at 7, I might not, but I'm glad to be here and grateful for the journey.
Well, you're very welcome, and we're very excited to have you here on the Writer's Parachute. Of course, we're going to go jump over before we end the show to our tip of the week, and we kind of teased it a little bit,
That's
talking
right.
about some of the things that Jason struggled with. One of them was an internal critic, and he mentioned to me in the green room about his wife having to stop him from throwing away his drafts. Now, I'm going
Hmm.
to talk about this a little bit, and then I'm going to let Jason talk a little bit about it. So, I think we have to step back from that internal critic because here's the thing that I've realized. My internal critic only gives me a hard time when I'm winning.
Yep.
He never says a word when I'm messing up, when I'm losing, when I'm failing, or any of that stuff, because he's more than happy to let me do that. So, number one, if he comes out to play, you're doing something right. Otherwise, he would just stay quiet. So, take that for what it is. Second of all, is a lot of times when things don't go the way we planned or we don't think they're as well as we imagine, sometimes that's about learning the craft of writing. Sometimes that's about exploring the ideas and figuring out whether or not you're passionate enough about it to follow through on the project. Because sometimes we have great ideas and we start writing about it and we're just like, I'm not that thrilled about it. I don't really want to, and so maybe that's part of it. Also, it's about clarifying those ideas and topics. Maybe what we thought was a great idea kind of goes off into left field, and that's a better way of looking at it, or a better way of writing about it, or even just a more passionate topic or idea. Also, sometimes we have to step back and think about, is it really the writing that's the problem, or is it the place that's the problem? So, I mean, we can have like really great scenes in a book that just don't work and we can't figure it out. Well, you know why? Because it just doesn't work for that book. It belongs in a
Mm-hmm.
different book. So, I don't advocate throwing stuff away. I advocate making a slush folder for all that stuff to go in. And then when you're stuck and when you're working on stuff, you can go look at it. And what I find fascinating for me with my slush files, I put it up on my website about 2 or 3 times a year. And it's just like, guys, here's all the deleted scenes from my books. And I'm always amazed by the response of people who want that. I'm just like, really? It's just stuff that I didn't use, but they want it because I guess, kind of like with the Comic-Con and, in the community and stuff, it makes them feel more connected to those characters,
Mhm.
those stories, because they get to see the stuff that got left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. So sometimes it's about place. And then the last thing I'm going to say is drafts are supposed to be messy. They're supposed to be, disjointed. They're supposed to not be great. Otherwise, we would just sit down and write a novel and be done with it. We wouldn't need
Mhm.
editors. We wouldn't need coaches. We wouldn't need to think about it. We don't think that way. We don't speak that way. That's why a lot of times when you get up to do a speech in front of people, you have to sit down and think about what you're going to say. Other words, it's just garbage flowing from your mouth, and you never get to the point because you've lost track. So, and that's sort of the things that's going on with the story. So, again, give your internal critic a kick in the pants. Don't let self-doubt or any of that stop you. And just remember, sometimes just writing a draft is about getting the garbage out of the way so you can get to the good stuff.
Mhm.
So what do you have to say about it, Jason?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes to all of that. About 12 years ago now, I think it was, I would write things, delete, throw them away. It was perfectionism, insecurity, major imposter, not only syndrome. I mean, this was a clinical condition. And so at one point, I remember my wife, who has shared much with wisdom with me along the way and along the years, including, hey, have you thought about going to college? She said, stop throwing your writing away. Just keep at it. Send some of it out there. See what happens. And so I'd sort of been on the cycle as a teenager and young 20s of trying to send things out and get published, and my voice just wasn't there just quite yet
Mhm.
in the way that it needed to be, and neither was my patience if I got feedback from an editor. One of the pieces that you mentioned, the English journal piece that I wrote,
Mhm.
I'm now really good friends with the editor. I'm working on a chapter for him, but I went through that probably 8 or 9 times with minor corrections. 20 years ago, I might not have done that. I might have taken that as a sign that, oh, this person doesn't like me, or I'm just not good at this. But I developed the persistence and the drive to really want to be published in this journal. And so I did that. And so it's that keep at it message.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But it's also, I love the idea of like a slush folder. I'm a big journal keeper. I think I have one. Yes, right here. Um, Look at that. Or even
Awesome.
very appropriate for talking comics. But I think Ray Bradbury has the best intros to his books where he talks about getting his ideas and writing them down and just, one word becoming a story. So if
Mhm.
there's a story out there that's alive inside you, just water it, just
Mhm.
fertilize it now and then and see what happens.
Right. Well, and not all stories need to be told. Sometimes you just have to get that story out to get to the good story.
Hmm.
And it happens. And I don't worry about perfectionism. I hear this a lot. I personally leave mistakes in my books, which drives a lot of people nuts. But I use it also as a tool to get readers to read it because if they can find the correct number of mistakes in the book, I'll give them a free t-shirt,
Oh, there you go.
you know? And I do know how many are in there because I've had it pointed out to me many times. But what I find is kids will read it better. They'll read it a little more critically
Hmm.
so that they can, and they'll want to read the book to get the free t-shirt. It's like that's nothing for me, and they've achieved what I want, which is to get them to read the books. So,
There you go.
and also too, I don't want to be perfect because then I have to live up to that with every subsequent book. And I don't want
Yes.
to. I don't want to. So I'm just like, I'm just a little bit better than last time. And maybe I'll hate perfection at some time, but I doubt it. So it's like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sometimes it's a living history of my progress as a writer. My
Yeah.
first book isn't as good as my second one, and my last book is better than all of the other ones. So, and that's okay.
We're people telling stories with the tools that we have.
Exactly. And when it's like any other muscle in your body, the more you use it, the better you get.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So there you go. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week of the writer's parachute. We invite you to come back again next week. Go ahead and make sure that you sign up for either the inbox email list or you hit the bell or subscribe button so you get notifications of new episodes. As always, I am so grateful to be the host here on the Writer's Parachute, guiding author and writer dreams to a perfect landing. And we hope that you find this a safe and confident creative space for you and your dreams to land well too. Until next time, see you guys later. Bye.